I want to use this occasion also to welcome our colleagues from EFSA. And I can assure you that the colleagues that you will listen to today, they are really at the core of the international cooperation within our remits. They have very long experience, and as many of the focal points, they have been in this focal point network, participating in building up the system that we are working on developing right now. We are very happy that the EFSA colleagues could set time aside in the busy schedule to participate in this national meeting. So there will be a mix of presentations between English and Norwegian, as it was before lunch. And I will not use much time now. I will sort of give the floor to Gorgias, who will look further into the scientific cooperation on its way towards partnership. So, Gorgias, I will start to share the presentation from my side, and if you can just give me a nod whenever you want me to change the page. So I will turn this around here, and I will set it there, and we are soon ready to go. Please, Gorgias, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Gisle. A belated good morning from my side as well, dear colleagues in Norway from Parma, cloudy Parma. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about scientific cooperation and the developments towards partnership, the ambition that EFSA has been working on the last few years. If we could go to the next slide, please, Gisle. I will try to avoid reiterating what Carlos said in his keynote speech at the beginning of this event, but this is in a nutshell how EFSA is doing risk assessment. So for us, the starting point is a question that we receive, a question on a specific food or feed safety concern or challenge. It usually comes to us from the European Commission. And on this question, which is well substantiated with the description of the problem and the parameters that we need to look into, the work, the scientific assessment is done by the scientific panels of EFSA. These are groups of experts that we have selected, independent experts that we have selected after a public call. And those people are the ones working to provide the scientific output that the requester will receive. We have 11 scientific panels, as Carlos briefly mentioned. They cover the entire remit of EFSA, from genetically modified organisms to food and feed additives to residues of pesticides, etc. And on top of those, we have a scientific committee. We can call it the 12th panel if we want, which is a group of experts that are working on methodological aspects and the application of methodologies across the different scientific panels. The final output of the work of the panel becomes the scientific opinion. It is published in the EFSA journal, and this is the scientific advice that EFSA provides to the requester, usually the European Commission. On this slide, there is one very important note, that is that the scientific panels can receive support not only from working groups, that is additional experts that work very closely with the panel, but also from the so-called Article 36 organizations that other speakers mentioned earlier in the morning. This has been made clear from a recent amendment of EFSA's founding regulation, which clearly states that the so-called member state competent bodies can provide support through preparatory tasks to the work of the scientific panels. And the amended regulation also clarifies now that this contribution can be substantial, can reach the level of the draft scientific opinion, which is quite advanced, quite substantial as a contribution. One more important note on my side, in this slide, but also on other slides in my presentation, I refer to member state competent bodies. That also includes organizations from Norway in the Article 36. So the correct, the accurate term that should be used should be competent bodies in the EU member states, Norway and Iceland. If we could move to the next slide, please. With the clarification that we recently have had in our funding regulation, that has been the trigger for EFSA to increase the ambition that it had with regards to scientific cooperation and the contribution that this cooperation could have on the scientific work of EFSA, on the workflow of EFSA. Partnership projects that I will mention later on are nothing else than scientific cooperation projects that we used to have since the very beginning here at EFSA, with a different level of ambition. So we're talking about projects that are longer term. They can easily reach up to 4 years. They cover more ground. They provide, as I said, more substantial support to the work of the scientific panels. These imply in terms of trust, if I can say so, but in essence, they're nothing different than the projects that we used to have, only bigger and more ambitious. The production of the scientific opinion continues to be done as normal. It is the output that the panel adopts and endorses, and it is made available through a publication in EFSA Journal, as used to be the case from the beginning. If we can move to the next slide, please. It is important to stress that together with a higher ambition with regards to partnership projects, also we have money available to support that. So nowadays we invest in scientific grants and procurement, as we call it, an amount which is about 35 million euros. And we believe that this amount will remain available on an annual basis for the coming years. This may not sound a lot, especially if some of you are used to the funding that's provided through other schemes like Horizon, for instance, from the GRTD, but it is a substantial change for EFSA standards. So if we look back a few years ago, back in 2018 or 2019, the amount that we had available was in the vicinity of 7 million euros. The money that we can now invest is 5 times more. And this, for us, is a substantial change, something that we hope will help us have much more substantial cooperation with the Article 36 organizations. Together with more money, together with the partnership ambition, also we see new trends in the projects that we start. Those tend to be bigger, longer in duration. They cover more ground with regards to the scientific work that they encompass. They're likely to be less per year, but the total participation across all the calls that we launch is likely to be higher. And this is basically because, as I said, the topics, the spectrum of topics that they cover is bigger, so it's more likely that partners will prefer to join forces in consortia rather than applying as sole participants. If we could move to the next slide, please. I think it would be useful for me to give you a little bit of insight on how we decide on which projects will be directed towards partnership opportunities and which will remain for EFSA to be done internally or only within the scientific panel and the working group. So for us, the starting point is to compile a list of what we need to do every single year. So we make a list of all the requests that we have or that we expect to have from the European Commission, all the mandates that we receive from there. And on that, we add all the topics that fall under what we call preparedness. So all the topics that we need to work on in order for us to be reasonably capable of providing scientific advice in the future. So anything that we need to do in order to cover scientific gaps that we might have, any methodologies that we need to evolve or develop, anything that needs to be in place for us to be relevant in the future. So this exercise takes us to a draft list, which is the draft work program that we have for the year and for the year that follows. And for each entry in this list, we are trying to see if there are any restrictions that would force us to do the work internally. Such restrictions could be, for example, timeframes. If something is needed at a very short time, we will not have the possibility to establish partnership or cooperation with somebody external. So we need to do it internally. But also things like the knowledge needed, the data needed, and the FTEs needed in order to successfully reply comprehensively to the mandate that we receive from the Scientific Commission. So once we identify topics that would need external support, then we go through the partnership potential that those topics have. And by partnership potential, I mean we try to understand whether our proposition for scientific cooperation will present something attractive to potential partners outside EFSA. And in order to do that, We take note of any priorities at country level, any capacities that we know that may exist there, and other factors as well. And if we move on to the next slide, I've tried to include more on what sources of information we use in order to understand the potential interest from the side of the countries, member states, Norway and Iceland. This is not something that I would call an exact science, so please consider the content of the slide as indicative only and not necessarily as a manual that we follow precisely. So we will look into the risk assessment work that is being carried out at a country level. And for that reason, we have a database with member state risk assessment plans, which is populated with information from the advisory forum members and also for the focal points. And there they indicate what sort of risk assessment activities, major risk assessment activities are ongoing or are planned to take place in the coming future. We also have very vivid discussions at the level of the advisory forum. Sergio spoke about that, but also within the focal point network. And in some cases there we can see indications about what will happen or what is going on with regards to risk assessment at national level. We take, of course, account of the experience that we have had with outsourcing, with grant and procurement in the recent years. And there we have clear views about the potential of some particular partners. This is something that we take note of. Of course, we check the scientific literature to see if there are any particular hubs of expertise that perhaps could help us if we launch a call on a particular topic, and other pieces of information that you see also on this slide. In some specific occasions, especially if we plan to launch a cooperation opportunity on something new, we may even organize dedicated events where we will invite all potentially interested parties and have a very open discussion about what we could do together and under which terms. It's not something that we do often. As I said, we do it only when we feel that the uncertainty that we have about the parameters of cooperation is rather high, but whenever we've done it, it has been quite productive. In all those things, the principal question is whether there is a sufficient number of Article 36 bodies that perhaps could help us. And sufficient means sufficient in terms of numbers, but also in terms of potential capacity, know-how, and FTEs likely to be available. But alongside this question, we also take note of any particular things that would make our proposition to you really win-win. So, for instance, if we realize that there are organizations already working on something similar, we see it as a prime opportunity to join forces and make sure that we fulfill our mission and our agendas in one go together. Now, if we could go to the next slide. When we are designing our propositions to you, when we are planning for our calls, we are trying to tailor it in a way that will be appealing to the potential target audience, what we feel would likely be interested in order to support us in our work. We can fine-tune a little bit the financial parameters. I will not dive into it. There is a presentation from the colleagues in our finance unit later on, and they will perhaps explain in more detail the various parameters there. But in general, we can decide on the funding that we will provide, but also on the funding intensity that will be available for participants. We can also try to prescribe a little bit the way that the work is going to be carried out. And in that way, again, it's not an exact science. We have two options, and these two options are the two extremes. We can try to break down the work in small pieces, independent, autonomous, if you like. And this gives the possibility for smaller partners to find something that fits their capacities, their needs, and their interests. Or we can go the opposite way and integrate everything that needs to be done under a single roof, under a single project, and make it available to partners and give them the opportunity to identify how to best cooperate or what resources to mobilize in order to address what we propose. This, I understand, looks a little bit theoretical, so perhaps it would be better if I could give you a couple of examples about how we do that in practice. So if we could go to the next slide. This is, in a nutshell, the different tasks that are covered by now it's a project. It was a call that was launched 2 years ago and concerned the assessment of dossiers in the domain of food enzymes, food and feed additives and food flavorings. And as you can see here, these are the different lots under the code that we had launched at the time. And each lot corresponds to one particular task that could be done in a kind of independent way. As I said, the basic advantage that this approach has had is that it made it possible for organizations that were small or had a very specific interest to apply, to express their interest to support us, without necessarily having to cover the entire work that is needed to evaluate a dossier in these domains. Of course, at the same time, the disadvantage of this approach is that the administrative burden is elevated, is increased, because that means in order to reach a draft opinion, we need to take into account many different inputs, make sure that they align and put them together before go back to the panel to have their final assessment. This is something that we have taken note of. And in a different call, similar but different call, which I'm presenting on the next slide, this is the call for the assessment of novel food dossiers. It's a call that is still open. The approach that we have is slightly different. So again, we identify the different tasks that are available there, but we require that the evaluation of a single dossier is carried out within a single partner or a single consortium. In that way, we avoid the transfer of information, the flow of information, the flow of work among different consortia, which is unnecessarily burdensome. To give you an example of the second approach that we follow, the integrated approach, on the next slide, I'm mentioning a call that we launched about a year ago. Now it's a project which is well into implementation. And it is a project that looks into the development of protocols for the evaluation of urgent authorizations of pesticides at member state level. So the consortium that has undertaken this project will need to develop three things, broadly speaking. Firstly, collect the information needed in order to support protocol development. That is, look, for instance, in what alternatives to chemical pesticides exist and what sort of substantiation, what sort of evidence for the effectiveness of the different plant diseases we have. Then they will have to develop protocols, which is something extremely relevant to risk management tasks, not only risk assessment, but also risk management. And then, once the protocols are developed, they will need to provide training material and training to the people that will use those protocols from that point onwards. So basically, in this consortium, we are entrusting the entire work, from the interactions with the scientific community, the search across the scientific literature, the development of the protocol, and whatever communication or consultation needs to be done with risk managers, but also the training and the provision of the training material that we will use from that point onwards. Indeed, an integrated solution, which we felt would be more appropriate in this particular case. With that being said, I would like to highlight also the role of the advisory forum and the focal points. I'm risking to overlap a little bit with what Carlos and Sergio mentioned in the presentation, so I would try to keep it very brief. The colleagues at the advisory forum and the colleagues in the focal points are essential for what we're trying to do. In my case, build partnerships with competent bodies at country level in the member states, but also in Norway and Iceland. These are the people that provide us information about what is relevant for the member states. These are the people that give us a clear picture of what can actually support us now. These are the people that help us understand what win-win means from the perspective of the member states or the countries. Very importantly, the focal points are the ones that come back to us at times, reporting on bottlenecks, reporting on difficult issues, on factors that hinder cooperation. These are things that we take very seriously and we try to address if, of course, we have the margin from a regulatory perspective. Focal points are extremely important in promoting goals and making sure that you receive the information needed in a timely manner. And these are the people that basically support us in communication and coordination, whether it's happening at national level. I would like to close my presentation. I know that I'm abusing a little bit your patience and your time. I will not dive into detail. These are the calls that we have currently open. The ones with the blue background are calls for grant, so they are supported by EFSA grants. The ones with the yellow, orangey background are calls, procurement calls. They are still available, so please, if you find the title interesting, relevant to what you're doing, or intriguing, please have a look and by all means apply. So thank you very much for your patience, dear colleagues, and Gisela. I will be happy to reply to any questions now or later on. The floor back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gorgias. As usual, extremely to the point and relevant, and very good examples given on the possibilities of cooperation.